Hi guys, this is Mark. In this video, we'll talk about transaction results. What this means is when you run your transaction and it completes all the operations, it would be quite important to know in the logic of your application if it was successful or failed. If it was successful, you may need to get some data out of that transaction. And if it failed, you may need to get the error so you can present it to the user or execute some logic in your application. So being able to use the APIs around the result of your transaction is quite important. Your transactions will consist of one or more operations, and they can be chained, and you learned about that in the previous video, or they may not be chained, they may not be connected with each other, and that is okay. What's important to understand is when transaction completes and the data is committed and the transaction is committed, for every single operation after transaction is done, you can actually get the underlying results using the API. And for instance, if the transaction is consist of the operations that retrieve data, and then you take the data and you modify some objects or you delete other objects, there are underlying APIs. And for every single operation, you can get the actual internal results. So if the operation was to retrieve data, you can actually get a collection of data in the transaction result. If an operation was to update an object, you can actually get the actual object that was updated in the transaction result. If it was a bulk update, you can get the number of objects that were updated. Same thing for bulk create. So basically the result for every single operation is going to be the same result that you would have gotten from just the basic API that corresponds to any of those operations. And I will demonstrate how it works. And in the previous video, as you saw, I was inspecting the network traffic, and in the response, you saw the structure of what we're actually getting. I will start with that, but then we'll start adding logic just to get a hold of that data that comes back in the transaction result. What you see on the screen is the same page that was created in the previous video when we were discussing chaining. I just modified the titles of the buttons just so we can differentiate them visually and see what each one of them does. So this button right here, find and update, the logic here is it runs an operation in the database, and then it performs an update on all of these objects that were returned from the find operation. So here, let's run this page and take a look at what the result is whenever this transaction runs. So here I'll switch to the network traffic, click the button. This is the request for the transaction, and let's take a look at the preview. And this is the preview of the response. So the response is the raw response, which is JSON, and preview is the kind of the pretty print of that JSON value. So in here, you will see that for every transaction result, there will be three properties: error, results, and success. And the success property will be either true or false. If it is true, it means the transaction ran successfully. And if success is false, then the error property will contain the actual error of what the database returned back to you. So here, whenever you are debugging your application and you want to see what's going on, this would be the number one spot I would recommend to check, just to see if a transaction is failing, just to see what's going on. This is where you should check. Now let's take a look at the actual results property. In the results property, you will see a list of all your operations, and every single operation has operation ID. Specifically, if we take a look at the codeless logic, and the same is true for the APIs in our SDK. So if you do it with code, it's going to be the same concept. Here for the find operation, I actually assigned operation ID called get orders. And I did not assign operation ID to the bulk update operation, because assigning an ID is an optional step. If you don't assign an ID to the operation, an ID is going to be assigned automatically by Backendless, because we need to identify every single operation that a transaction consists of. So in here, you see there are two operations. One is called get orders, and that is find, and the other one is going to be the bulk update. So now in the results, as you can see, there is get orders, and it uses exactly the same name that I assigned to it. And the second one is the generated ID of that operation, update underscore bulk order 1. So there's always going to be a number because you may have multiple bulk updates. So Backendless will assign and it will increment the value and it will assign 1, 2, and 3, and so on for every bulk order. So here the interesting thing is that if I expand, let's say get orders, it will tell me that this operation type was find. So we're retrieving data. And here is going to be the result. So these are the values. These are the actual objects that find operation retrieved. And you actually get the API to introspect that response in your logic or in your code. And then the same thing is true for every single operation that makes up your transaction. So here in the bulk update, you see the operation type is update underscore bulk. And these operation types listed in our documentation. And the result was 10, which means that there were 10 objects that were updated by this bulk update. So now that you understand the structure of this, at least just by looking at the network traffic, let me show you how you can use this information programmatically, because in here, for instance, we may want to extract the collection of this data, just render it in a table just to show what objects were updated, okay? Because this is with chaining, these are the records that we update. So for this, what I will do is, first of all, I'm going to get a data grid component from our marketplace. Just to demonstrate something different in UI Builder, I will use a new UI component that we will use to render our data. And to do this, I will go to the components screen, and then in the component screen, I click install component. And this will update briefly, and I should be able to find data grid component. There's a bunch of components, and data grid should be somewhere here. Here it is, data grid. So select this component, click install, and now this component will become available in UI Builder. So once it is installed, I go back to user interface, and then here in this toolbar, you see now I have this data grid component. So drag it out here, and the width, let me see if I can put 100%. And for this component, I can modify the column definition just to specify what columns I want to see in my data grid. This is going to be a JSON, and I know that I will be displaying orders. So I will have a column called discount. I will have a column called total. I will have a column, let's just actually say subtotal, total, and I will add one more, which will be object ID. So this will be object ID. We do not need this comma. And by the way, in here, you can specify whether columns are sortable or not. And let's make some of them, such as total, for instance, sortable. And same thing for discount, we'll make it sortable. So this is the column definitions. All right, and let's assign a value, an ID to our data grid. And I will call it my orders. Okay, so now my orders, I will set up data binding for the, I believe it's going to be rows data logic. I will call it orders. So it's going to be listening on the orders property. And also I will set up visibility to the same orders. And you will see why I'm doing that in just a second. So at this point, the UI is set up. What I expect to get to show you with this is whenever I click this button and the transaction runs, if transaction is successful, I will go into the transaction result, get all the orders that were fetched, and I just want to render them in this data grid. So now the rest is going to be in the logic itself. Let's go into the logic for the button. And the very first thing that we need to do is in this run transaction, you see that it has the return result checkbox. Select this checkbox and create a variable, and we will call it transaction result. tx result. So we will set tx result to connect this block to the tx result. So at this point, we ran transaction, we actually got the result. So let's check if that transaction was successful or not. And in order to do this, if you go to transaction API, there is a block, is transaction successful? Okay, so this returns whether it's successful or not, and this expects transaction result. So here we will add if statement, if transaction successful, and the transaction is going to be identified by this tx result variable. So let's grab tx result. So if transaction is successful, now we want to go into this result, get the result of the operation that is called get orders, and then from there we want to get all the actual orders. How do we do this? It's actually pretty simple, but you need to know how to use these blocks. Which is why I'm sharing this information with you. So here, what we want to do is use the following block. It is going to be, I believe, get operation. Is it a get operation reference? Get transaction result, this one. So get transaction result also expects the actual transaction result. And this, remember, the actual transaction result consists of these three properties. So here we want to get the actual results, that big object that will have results for every single operation. So in order to get a hold of this guy right here, we use get transaction result block. And get transaction result block actually returns an object. And that object can be treated as any other object in Codeless, where it will have properties, and the top level property will map to the name of the operation that you want to retrieve. So what we are going to do is use get property, and in here we're going to say get orders, and get orders is the name of my operation, get orders. And then after we get orders, we want to get results. And let me check if it is called results or result. I think it's result, singular case. So get orders dot result from here. Okay, so this will return a collection of all the orders that this operation fetched. So now what we're going to do is just put it in page data and let our data grid component visualize all those orders that were fetched. And for this, let's just go into use the set property in page data, and the property, I think we called it my orders, and put this value in here. All right. So at this point, we checked if the transaction is successful. We got the transaction result, which is the collection of all other results organized by the actual operation ID. And then from here, we're retrieving result of a specific operation, which is operation ID dot result. Okay, let me just verify whether the property that I assigned for our data grid is indeed my orders. And for this, I'm going to go back in here and check the data binding. So let's just say this is going to be my orders, and this will also be my orders. And with this, let's just run the page and see what happens. So far, so good. The data grid is not visible because there is nothing in my orders. Clear the log, run the transaction, and here we go. We got the orders, we rendered in the data grid, and now we can see what orders were updated by our transaction. By the way, this data grid component is super cool because here you can just click on the column, it will sort everything. You can do all kinds of filtering. So here if contains, let's say 1.0, and you can do OR, and you can just start building crazy cases for just filtering your data. And you can resize your columns. I'm not sure if you can move the columns around. So this component is just absolutely fantastic. But the point of this video, of course, is to show you how you can go into the result for the transaction, check if it is if the transaction is successful or not, and then if it is, retrieve data from a specific operation. And that's exactly what this logic right here accomplishes. The most important takeaway is this is how you check if it is successful or not, and this is how you get that mega object that has all the results for individual operations. So you peek inside of that and retrieve the property that consists of operation ID and then dot result, and that gives you the actual result of a specific operation for the transaction they just completed. Fairly simple, right? As long as you know what blocks to use. But once you know, I think it is fantastic, because and I'm really excited about this data grid component. It is really, really cool. Anyway, that's all I have prepared for you guys. This is the last video on the transactions. There's going to be one more that is sort of related to transactions, which is kind of a derived feature. But as far as the transactions, that's all there is. We talked about just the transaction overview. We talked about the blocks. We talked about isolation modes. We talked about all the operations, chaining, and transaction results. And that just should give you pretty much all of the knowledge there is when it comes to running transactions in Backendless. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you find this useful. And as always, happy coding.